who believed that all human beings are descendants of a single primal pair, the Adam and Eve mentioned in the Bible, and the polygenists, who held that the story of the Bible is only the story of the history of white folks, and that the various major human races are actually separate species with absolutely separate created origins. However, I think we can all acknowledge that in the logic of polygeny, that is, the claim that races are truly separate species, is the absolutely strongest potential argument for the ineradicable, primal, deep differences among. You can't make a stronger argument than the claim that races are actually separate species with separately created origins. So I take polygyny as the strongest form of that claim for profound inequalities based on an ineluctable biology. Let me just give you a couple of examples, and I'll show you some slides from that era to show you how popular a view it was, and not among marginal people. This is David Hume, who we all revere for his analysis of causality, among other things, who wrote in 1766, "I am apt to suspect the Negroes, and in general all the other species of men, for there are 4 or 5 different kinds, to be naturally inferior to the whites. There never was a civilized nation of any other complexion than white, nor even any individual eminent either in action or speculation. No ingenious manufacturers amongst them, no arts, no sciences. Such a uniform and consistent difference could not happen in so many countries and ages if nature had not made an original distinction betwixt these breeds of men." Let me show a few slides from the days of polygyny. This is 1799, Charles White's Regular Gradation in Man. It's the last attempt I know of in the English literature to depict all of the animal creation, as White would have called it, as a single ascending linear series, according to the old view of the chain of being. Now, of course, it's a remarkably motley and heterogeneous assemblage that White gives us here, beginning in the lower left corner with a snipe, going to a crocodile, to a greyhound, up to monkeys, and then in the top row, up the conventional racist ladder of human beings, from blacks to yellows to whites. The next is not from a racist tract, but from the standard American textbook in anthropology of the mid-19th century, Knott and Gliddon's Types of Mankind. It represents the kind of egregious data selection that is clearly done in order to reinforce a viewpoint of the similarity of the so-called lower races with monkeys and apes. Another one in the same tradition and from the same book, which can pass without further commentary. Now here's a more subtle and interesting story, and there are many like this. The most famous study done under the aegis of a belief in polygyny was performed in Philadelphia by a physician named Samuel George Morton, who in the 1830s made the world's largest collection of skulls of different races of human beings and published his account of the differences in cranial capacity in his Crania Americana of 1839. I'm going to show you 2 slides from the Crania Americana. The lithographs done by John Collins, beautiful works of art representing some of the very best of 19th century American scientific illustration, but they also show how illustration can be subtly used in the service of unconscious prejudice. Morton in this figure shows us the skull of an Araucanian Indian, and he's trying throughout to emphasize that Indians have smaller cranial capacities than whites. The way in which the skull is depicted there, it does seem to slope backwards and to be, if you will, low-browed and therefore not well endowed. That's where the terms high-browed and low-browed come from. They're old terms from 19th century craniometry. However, Morton here has oriented the skull in a completely unconventional way. An old convention in these depictions dictates that the horizontal axis shall be on what was later called the Frankfurt horizontal, that is the line between the ear hole and the tip of the nose. Now, this skull is not oriented along the Frankfurt horizontal. The horizontal goes down like that. Therefore, the skull tilts back and seems to be low-browed. Now, you might say, well, maybe Morton didn't follow that convention. Maybe he put all his skulls that way. But no. Look how he orients the skull of a superior Swiss white man. Right on the Frankfurt horizontal. With the apparent more vaulted and better endowed cranium resulting from it. All right, that's stage one. Let's go to stage two then. With the publication of The Origin of Species in 1859, of course and immediately, the old debate between monogeny and polygeny became irrelevant. With the triumph of Darwinian evolution, everyone had to admit that all human beings must be able to trace their ultimate ancestry back to a single point of origin. That's implicit in the very evolutionary argument. Now, you might think superficially that therefore evolution would have been a powerful and necessary blow towards the acceptance of equality among human races. But it wasn't, you see, because although it is a retreat from the hard argument of polygeny in some logical sense, there is, in the evolutionary view, another interpretation which, although it admits a common origin, is more congenial with respect to its view about the nature of racial differences with the old notion of ineradicable innateness. That is, you can say, yes, indeed, of course I admit it, evolution requires it, that all human races have a common point of origin. But, you then argue, that point of origin was so long ago that human races have been so separate for so long that substantial genetic differences translating to inequalities have evolved and are now so fixed in the various races that for all it means in terms of the possibility of ever eradicating those differences, you might as well say they're original. This is from Ernst Haeckel's 1874 Anthropogeny of the Evolution of Man. It's not meant to be subtle, and it's not. Here, Haeckel, showing the kinship of humans, but he chooses a black man with apes, not only has his black man sitting on the limb of a tree, but even on a limb below that where others of the great apes are perched. Now here's an interesting example meant to show the ramifications of scientific racism. In the 19th century, there arose, originally in Italy, but spreading throughout the world, an important movement within the study of criminal behavior, begun by an Italian named Lombroso in 1876, published his book, L'Uomo Delinquente, Criminal Man. Lombroso argued that a large percentage, not all, of criminal acts occurred as the result of the innately, biologically criminal nature of offenders, and that you could tell who the biologically tainted offenders were by atavistic signs of apish morphology preserved in the offenders. In other words, criminals were individual human beings who unfortunately did not progress far as most of us along the scale of evolution. And that was a very powerful movement, which obviously had its social utility in arguing that crime is not to be ascribed to social inequalities, but to an ineluctable sort of biology. In any event, this is the frontispiece to Lombroso's L'Uomo Delinquente, in which we see the physiognomy of various innately criminal people. Okay, I then move to the second theme, namely the discussion of geography, or where did humans evolve. This is a much shorter story, but it's an interesting one because it reinforces the same theme. It has to do with the long effort, in a sense still continuing, to deny what now seems to be factually so, namely that the source of human origin is indeed in Africa. This desire to deny it largely being motivated by a wish to see the black people of Africa as a secondary migration and degeneration of a human stock in Africa, with the origin of humanity in Asia, in the Indian or Central Asian cradle of the Aryan peoples. That's the old Aryan myth, if you will. I think you know that when Dart discovered the Australopithecines in the 1920s in Africa, they were not accepted, the creatures that we now all accept as ancestral to us. They were regarded as an odd side branch of apes that walked erect. It wasn't until the 1950s when